I think the more important thing is that we're kind of entering the post-truth world, and that, obviously you can have real pictures that get on the internet that you can deny, and then you can have fake pictures be created, unbelievably hyper-realistic pictures of politicians saying things they didn't say.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today great to have CB Woodhouse back in the studio. How are you, CB?
Yeah, good, thanks, Paul. Great to be back again. I don't know how many times this is now.
It's always
up there.
always good to catch up and hear some of your insights and opinions. A good chunk to delve into today on the New Zealand and the international front, and keen to hear an update on what's happening in your world with Voyager and First Domains. Maybe just a quick intro from yourself on where you fit into this big wide world of technology in New Zealand.
Sure. Well, being the New Zealand Tech Podcast, I assume there's a bunch of tech people out there, so this may be redundant for a number of people. But yeah, I was one of the first people to start an internet company in New Zealand at sort of 18, 19. My first company was called Orcon, which at one stage was New Zealand's fourth largest ISP. It's now basically been absorbed into pretty much the fixed line business of 2 Degrees, which is New Zealand's third largest telco. I retired at sort of 28, 29 when I sold Orcon, and had a 5-year sabbatical. And then 15 years ago, I started Voyager Internet, which I run now. Voyager then acquired a number of companies, about 10 different companies. The largest acquired company was First Domains. First Domains is the largest New Zealand-owned domain name registrar. So if you think of like mcdonalds.nz, there's a 20% chance that sits on our servers. So First Domains, which is a subsidiary of Voyager, sort of runs 20% of the, domain name infrastructure in New Zealand, and that leads to a whole bunch of stuff. Voyager is an ISP and a parent company, provides about 1% to 2% of all the internet in New Zealand. So not huge numbers, but we still turn over approximately $40 million, employ 120 people. The New Zealand telco market's sort of a $10 billion market, so even 1% market share is decent. And I basically have not been the CEO for 10 years of the Voyager group of companies. And about 6 months ago, my CEO got headhunted and got a dream job with Amazon Global. I couldn't compete with the salary she was offered, so I let her go. And then I was thinking about whether to hire a new CEO, and then I just decided to step back into the role and keep the CEO money for myself, put it in my back pocket. So I basically haven't run 120 staff organizations since I was in my 20s, which was 20 years ago. And so, it's basically been a bit of a shock being back to working 40, 50 hours a week and doing all the CEO stuff, but I'm really enjoying it. And the more you work, kind of the more ideas come. So I've, started to have all these ideas and got a whole lot of things going on, and it's an exciting time. So keen to rev up whatever it is that we're doing on the New Zealand internet and hosting and cloud space and everything. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations! That's an exciting move. And before we jump in, also a big thank you to our show partners: One New Zealand, Spark, 2 Degrees, Workday, and Gorilla Technology. Really appreciate the support. Their support keeping us on air over the years. I think I should look up the exact date that our first episode came out, but we're within weeks of being 15 years old as a podcast. It's quite nice to be able to look back and go, well, started this in early 2011. So here we are.
Sort of almost, kind of. Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
You would have been pretty much on the podcast thing when podcasts were invented, right?
No, we're a few years behind, maybe. Yeah, there'd certainly been other podcasts in New Zealand and beyond, but I think it was our third episode. We hit number 1 on the iTunes charts in New Zealand across, all the categories.
Yeah.
And that, I guess that was interesting to sort of see in other podcasts that we launched, like the New Zealand Business Podcast. Also, were able to chart very quickly, but there was a lot less local content, and that was something that, we were really keen to encourage and push. And I guess most broadcasters now have been, got pretty heavily involved in podcasting in one form or another, although there hasn't been, a huge amount in the tech space. Interesting, when we launched, there were maybe two at least a couple of other New Zealand-based tech podcasts around.
You burnt them off pretty quickly, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened, but there's.
I can't imagine there's much room for multiple New Zealand tech podcasts. So if you're in there, you're probably dominating, right?
So, well, let's jump in on the New Zealand front. The first bit of news: New Zealand have started shutting down their 3G network. They've got some 2G there as well. That's part of that shutdown. We talked about this late last year as 2 Degrees got in. We're turning theirs off. So we're seeing that happen across all the mobile networks. And this is really about freeing up the radio spectrum so it can be dedicated to 4G and 5G services. So yeah, Dunedin are the first cab off the rank there, and there's a bit more detail online there on the One New Zealand website if you want to find out a little bit more around that 2G, 3G shutdown and timelines. So yeah, Dunedin's underway now. There'll be a range of rural sites through their RCG or Rural Connectivity Group coming up 28th of November, early Feb, Southland and Otago, 10th of February, Canterbury, West Coast, Tasman, Marlborough, and really the rest of the South Island except for Christchurch, 17th of February, Northland, etc. And then we've got Waikato, 24th of Feb, and then a week apart we've got 3rd of March, Christchurch, a week later, Auckland, week later Wellington, and then by the end of March the 2G calling network gets turned off. So yeah, quite a transition.
Yeah, I think that from the experience I've had, Voyager doesn't have a mobile network, but we do some resold fixed wireless, and I want to get into mobile at some point soon. But I have a work phone and a personal phone, and network comparison, and I need to be online, and sometimes I use one for a hotspot, and then my mum is with a different provider. So between me and my mum, we have all networks covered, and I know my mum's with one, and she kept on getting these messages saying, the network's shutting down, and you need to do this. And then I've been getting the same thing on 2 Degrees. Haven't got any messaging with Spark, but it was stressing my mum out because she thought the way the message was written that she had to get a different phone, and it looked like there was some problem. And then I sort of read it again. No, your phone's on 5G. There's no problem. But It was kind of ambiguous, and then you couldn't stop it. So she just keeps on getting these messages. There's a 2G shutdown, and worrying about it. So it's my personal impression is that the migrations by maybe 2 Degrees and One have been done a little bit sloppily, whereas I would have thought they could look up your IMEI or something and say, oh, you've got a 5G phone, we're not going to send you the text messages. And I know a few people that have been stressed out by the whole network shutdown. Oh, what does it mean? Am I going to lose my cell phone? And do I have to buy an iPhone 17? And I've had people ask because I'm in telecommunications. So it seems a bit messy to me, but I'm sure it's not easy to tell 1.5 million customers or whatever that some of these big guys have what's happening and make sure they know, and then they don't get left without a critical service or something. So it's a balance, right? But it seems like a bit messy.
Yeah, look, I think it's challenging to do these sorts of things on a large scale. What folks can do is text 3G to 550 from their phone, and understand that you'll get a text back, and that will advise whether your phone is directly impacted. There may be some 4G or 5G handsets that are maybe parallel imported, or there's some other oddity with them that they won't support what's called VoLTE, voice over LTE. So those should really be the only people that would be getting, if you've done that should be getting stressed if you've got, a dodgy phone in that form, and that it's not able to actually do the calling. But yeah, by texting 3G to 550, I think you should be able to get back an answer on that scenario. I don't recall having got a whole lot of texts on this. Maybe it's when I saw it was like, yeah, I know about this, so I've just sort of forgotten about it. But I keep active on on all three networks, and when I'm traveling, fair bit of comparison. So yeah, it's always interesting kind of looking at how the networks work, and yeah, it does seem to depend where you are, one network can be a little bit better than the others, but I think they've got a lot closer, over the last few years than where they used to be. And but you'll get exceptions. I was at Mount Maunganui over the weekend, and the particular spot, the batch that I was staying at, that friend's batch, I was looking at the bars on my phone, on my main phone, which has a SIM in it the SIM was turned on for 1NZ and for Spark, and in that case, the better coverage was Spark network. So you do get those sort of scenarios while one network's just that's quite a bit better than another. But I've also sort of seen the inverse. But yeah, not usually a big difference as my impression these days in lots of places around the country. And I guess what we will see, as we move into a world of satellite comms being part of our mobile networks, is that'll bring things even closer together.
Yeah.
On to other topics. We've got this issue with these hornets in Auckland, that the yellow-legged hornets, which are potentially a major issue if they're not able to be eradicated. And I was quite curious to read around the tracking technology that they're putting in place. I think I tracked down the company. I'm just trying to see if I've got it here. A Dutch company seems to be behind these trackers, and they're 0.16 of a gram. So they're able to be attached to one of these. It's the yellow-legged hornet, but they're able to attach these trackers to that, or to any of these other varying wasps. And they've been using those to basically be able to track these yellow-legged hornets when they fly back to, I guess, back to the hive where the queen is, so they can go and eradicate them.
I'm guessing they don't have like a 4G or a GSM chip or anything like high power. It's probably
that'd be nice.
It's probably like ultra low Internet of Things, Bluetooth something, and then a triangulation antenna array or something, right? So they probably
they might be putting up their own aerials in order to do it. I'm not sure if it's using something existing in terms of IoT networks and the like. Obviously, you're pretty limited when you've got something that's a 16% of a gram, and you got to attach that to the wasp.
Yeah, years and years ago, the government made a change. I don't know whether you remember this. They introduced some additional low power FM bands where normally you kind of had to be licensed. And then I thought at the time, this was back in 2005, I think. I thought at the time, if I jump on a frequency, then I can start a radio station, and then I don't have to pay the things, and I'll be the most profitable radio station. So actually, on K Road, there was a radio station, CBFM, that I set up with a friend for a while.
Yep.
And I jumped on the frequency and just had Winamp like circulating all my favourite songs with some recordings. And I thought, if I jump on the frequency, I kind of own it. Me and my friend purchased like a little radio transmitter, FM radio transmitter from the UK.
Yep. And
it was literally the size of a matchbox.
Wow.
And you could power it on a 9-volt battery. And then when I had it going on, St. Kevin's Arcade with like an aerial, we had an aerial that went up on the roof.
Yeah.
You could literally hear it all the way out to Muriwai. And, you'd play it in your car. And so CBFM was 107.6, I think, for a while.
Yep.
But then what happened is, as more people cottoned on to the low power FM, there was nothing stopping them. And then there was a guy, obviously if you end up with two lower power FM stations, one at the north of Albany or something, and one in the south Auckland, you could kind of have 50% each. But there was some guy that jumped on my frequency, and he was literally, a few hundred meters away in town. And so we had this huge overlap thing where basically we kind of cancelled each other out, and he sort of took me offline, and you could only... the coverage went from like Piha all the way back into like, the central city, and it was completely pointless in no time. But I always remember thinking, man, it's incredible that, radio technology, you could power something on like a tiny transmitter on like a 9-volt battery and pick it up crystal clear, sending music all over Auckland when there wasn't interference. So anyway, a bit of a diversion there, but I guess they probably can have quite a small amount of power going out and find them.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, if you think of, and I'm talking about a different spelling here, but the old CB radios, right?
Mm-hmm.
The letter CB was how I recall it anyway. And little handheld one of those, and you could chat to people, all over the place. So yeah, quite fascinating. And on the topic of low power radio, I was once I think I was a 9 or 10% shareholder in a radio station that started out low power and ended up with a full frequency. I think NZME or somebody ended up buying the frequency, ended up becoming the most valuable asset.
Right. Yeah.
In that business. But yeah, interesting how the technology has evolved, and now so much we do is able to be done online, but we still have these older mechanisms, and they have their value, right? So I guess in this case that transmitting is quite possibly not over the internet at all, but they've got that ability to track these hornets. So hopefully they managed to get the eradication done that they're trying to do. But great to see technology being used for a really good cause. And I think that will be lifting their chances that they manage to eradicate these things, and the biosecurity NZ team get a great outcome. So
those hornets are like 4 times bigger than a normal wasp. So I don't pity the person that has to hold them down and like glue it to its back, put a little backpack on it. The backpack installation guy probably has a few wounds to like show for it. Apparently they're like extremely, extremely painful stings. Yeah.
Oh,
so.
yeah. Well, they'd probably be pretty dangerous if you got yourself too close to a nest and ended up getting multiple stings. Last week or so, we've had the news of EB Games closing. Thought that this is interesting because there used to be, I guess, a broader range of retailers and varying aspects of tech, and there were lots of places you could buy computer games, but a huge percentage of that is all online these days. So the EB Games kind of passing of EB Games in New Zealand, if you want to call it that, and an end of an era, really. That said, you can still buy, there's a few places like JB Hi-Fi and the like where you can buy, computer games on disc and so on, but not on DVD, but not too many.
Yeah, I mean I'm amazed that EB Games has lasted as long as they had. There's one in Glenfield Mall, and I always, for years that's like my local mall, and I kind of go past and I'm like, are they still around? Because I just thought it would have happened sooner. Yeah, it's kind of like the Blockbuster, right? But the sad part is we're kind of in the final throes of this. You have to rent everything economy, like there's almost nothing you can own anymore. And I have a credit card just for like internet charges, and every month it's like pages of things. I have my Google account, I have my iCloud account, and it's people used to not want to pay $5 for anything on the internet, and now all of a sudden it's like, hang on, just to like have anything, Google extra storage and this and that, and every app is $5. And I notice Apple's just starting to transition to like a subscription for Creative Studio, which includes Final Cut Pro. And the reason I always love Final Cut Pro is it wasn't Adobe, because I'm a sort of hobbyist, but I like to have Adobe products, but I don't want to pay $500 a year just so I can use Photoshop and some of the stuff. So it's like annoying that you can't, I used to own Adobe, and then it was when I want Photoshop, I just open it up. I don't feel guilty. But now I'm like, I don't want to pay $30 a month for, some Adobe products when it's not my job. So it's sort of pushing people into like, a dead end where, games and everything, it's you don't own your game, it's all subscription. So it's definitely
the world has changed. And it was fascinating news to see Apple launching their Creative Studio and trying to somewhat take on, Adobe Creative Cloud. And we definitely are in a time of transition, but I think it's great to see there being a level of competition against Creative Cloud, because you never want just sort of one vendor that's too dominant. It was maybe the same with Netflix, but that's a bit more complicated because you end up needing to have multiple subscriptions to watch content now. But that's the world we're in. With on the Apple side, you can still buy their individual apps as an outright purchase, but it seems like with the Creator Studio, you're getting access to some extras, maybe in terms of AI type capabilities and so on, that may sit outside of what you get when you're on the ongoing subscription. So they're not completely kneecapping those who don't want to go down that track, which is I guess an interesting approach, so as not to upset people too much, shall we say. So
I suspect there'll be a window of opportunity where you can own, buy and own, because that's the way Apple's always done it. And then at some point that'll be removed. So I've made sure that I kind of own everything in Creator Studio. I already owned Apple Motion and, a few of the things like Pixelmate, I'd already purchased them. But I'm hoping that if I purchase them, they'll continue to upgrade them because I'm an owner. And then when they withdraw it and say, oh, you can only rent this now, going forward, the old owners will still get, the software. Fingers crossed, probably not, but it'd be nice.
Yeah. The other one that sort of fits into that camp who's competing with Adobe is Canva, and they made an interesting acquisition probably nearly 2 years ago, a product called Affinity, who their software suite competes with Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and you could argue Adobe, InDesign, and some designers would, out of the Creative Cloud, those would be the 2 or 3 products that they mainly use. And what Canva have done, they've made those products available for free. Yeah. So you were able to do an outright purchase of those products, and they were a lot cheaper than the Adobe suite. And some people swear by them and really like them. If you put all of that together with what Apple have, you'd probably actually have a really strong compete with the Adobe Creative Cloud, because it's broader in terms of audio, video, and design. But those 2 suites on their own aren't probably perfect competition to Adobe.
Yeah, I love playing with tech as you do. And, I kept on hearing about Canva, but it was one of those things where I kind of hadn't really checked it out because I was like, I don't have a need. And then I have a friend of mine who literally runs their entire life on it. And then they sent me a presentation and it was awesome. And then, obviously one of the things you can do with Canva is have the online presentation. So it's basically, it kind of builds almost a website, for the presentation, and the presentation has a link and then it just loads up. So it's almost, you can save you building a website. So then I thought, I better do it. And I'm not a programmer, but I'm definitely a tech guy. But then it's now so overwhelmingly complicated. I went to Canva and I was like, I did not realize all the stuff was here. So one weekend I thought I'm going to upskill myself and I'll do Canva tutorials, and I'm still lost. I'm like, it's like, coming into Word 2099 and then, from going from Word 1, it's like a bit much of a jump. But anyway, maybe I'm just a bit slow, but becoming a bit more proficient with Canva is on my to-do list, because it really does seem like it just does so much stuff now.
Yeah, well, their acquisition of Affinity those are a whole different set of products, although they fit in the Canva camp, and of course Canva started out as a sort of super simple, easy to use, and of course their ecosystem has grown. With those free Affinity products, you get kind of the base product, but without the varying AI add-ons. So they're saying it's free, but ultimately I imagine most people are going to need to pay a subscription, because they'll want some of those best features that come with the subscription. Also, just quickly on the New Zealand front, the government have launched this AI advisory pilot. You might have seen something in the media around that, to help small businesses adopt AI safely and effectively. It's a little bit, perplexing in that it's up to $15,000. It's sort of a co-funded, program that they're doing, but their initial, or the allocation they've committed to so far, is only $765,000. So we're talking, what's that, 50 odd businesses that can actually sign up for it. So
I think it was Ronald Reagan that said the most terrifying words in the English language is, "Hello, I'm here from the government, I'm here for help." Yeah. So the idea of the government providing AI assistance is a bit scary, but it is a wild west, and obviously everyone's trying to make do of it. But there's so much stuff coming out, and then you find out, this is actually just a a front end to ChatGPT that someone's built, and then, this is a thing, and then people say it's a product, and then turns out it's just a wrapper, and then like we're trying to do some stuff, and then you have things with security holes, and it's such a wild west. But yeah, it's really obviously fascinating where things are going to go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in this case, this one is kind of it's offering funding towards projects for these small businesses, but through a very particular channel through the regional business partner network. So basically, over 99% of businesses that probably would say, oh yeah, we're in that sort of small to medium business category, are unlikely to be able to get access to it. So on sort of international front, a couple of interesting topics wanted to tap in on. Apple have said that they're partnering with Google. So Gemini is going to power Siri. So this is an interesting move. I think because a lot of people have been throwing shade at Apple for announcing AI capabilities and I guess across the Apple ecosystem, and they haven't maybe delivered anywhere near at the sort of level that people might expect to date. And this many thought, I guess, was an opportunity for OpenAI, that there was likely to be a partnership with there, but OpenAI have lost that opportunity, and Apple are partnering with Google, which I think for some will be quite a sort of surprise, especially noting that your Android phones and your Samsung phones and so on are obviously going to be leveraging Google and Gemini. So this is going to make that Apple versus Google competition that much closer.
Yeah, well, obviously the various AI companies are, to a certain extent allied with tech companies. So, for example, OpenAI has got big investments from Microsoft, and then as a result, by default, they use Bing, and obviously most of the time Bing is not that great. But yeah, because the information sources are different, like I don't know whether it's OpenAI, I think it's OpenAI, they take a huge amount of their training data from Reddit and have an agreement and, Wikipedia. But then Google has, emails from, half of the world with Gmail. And so the training data that is being used has kind of come from the allied sources. And so you do see Gemini versus, Gemini being Google versus OpenAI aligned with Microsoft. You do see some quite different results. And, that obviously has interesting perspectives. I think that obviously Siri was a kind of a leader, and, it was really terrible in the early days. You'd get frustrated yelling at your phone, do one simple thing, tell me the time, and it would misunderstand you. And now we're so far beyond that it's so sophisticated. Or voice recognition is sophisticated. Siri's not sophisticated, but voice recognition is sophisticated. But I came to the conclusion a while ago that this never would have happened under Steve Jobs, and Apple is so far behind. The tech guys, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, they're leading this AI stuff, and Apple's so far behind they have to go, tail in hand to Google and beg for some, give us some AI stuff, please, mister. But I started to
I don't imagine
change
it was quite like that.
It's probably a little bit. I mean, they still pay for Google Maps and things, right? But I started to change my opinion that it actually could be a brilliant strategy because, if you look at Meta, basically, wasting $200 billion on, Zuckerberg's, kind of metaverse ideas, and there's risk being head of the pack because you don't know where things are going to go. And while it looks like AI is going to be the next big thing, there are a lot of struggles to make money, and there are, $1 trillion literally investments in data centers. And so by holding back a little bit and waiting to see what happens, Apple may have actually played the smartest game where they've let everyone else get out in front, that burn huge amounts of cash. And there was an analyst that a lot of your readers probably would have seen that basically said that the whole AI market is essentially a big circle jerk. NVIDIA is, getting huge chip orders from OpenAI, and then OpenAI is paying NVIDIA, and then Oracle is saying that they're going to have, AI services running on cloud, and then it all goes around in a circle, and then it's like everyone is paying everyone else, and
all
it's,
the share prices are going through the roof.
All the share prices are going through the roof, but they're basically just giving away ChatGPT to everyone.
Yeah.
And what is the end game? So I think it's possible that Apple may have played the really smart game, and certainly, open source models like DeepSeek and things, the technology, when ChatGPT came out, it was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But actually the technology of how to do it is understood. The training models are understood. So by holding back, Apple can probably take commodity hardware in the future and then just run models on it. So they may have saved a huge amount of capex. And I believe that Apple is still sitting on something like $1 trillion of cash, some huge, unbelievable amount that no other company in history has ever sat on. So when they want to make a move, maybe they just kind of gobble up the companies that start to struggle, or I don't know. But another thing that I think is interesting is 2 weeks ago, I was reading an article and there was a mathematician made a discovery that after large language models are trained with, a trillion point data set, once the training data has kind of been locked in, which is essentially the weights of, how the kind of neurons, artificial silicon neurons think, you can actually go through and delete 90% of the neurons and the model still performs 99.99% accuracy. So essentially only after the training is done, you can take 90% of the brain of the large language model away and it still essentially functions the same. And that's a brand new discovery. So what it means is that essentially large language models right now can run on 10 times less power. So the existing infrastructure that OpenAI is running on can be re-architected to essentially service 10 times as many customers. And so already the investment is starting to scale down. So again, things like that coming out may mean that Apple has made a really clever decision, and that it looks like you needed $1 trillion investment to do AI, and then it turns out it's a tenth of that, and actually, you can do whatever. So I think Apple may be way behind and have made a huge boo-boo, or they're the smartest team with sitting on a pile of cash that'll ultimately win, and it's too early to call, but very interesting.
Yeah, on the cash on hand, I do remember seeing sort of figures of 162 billion and whatnot, US dollars for Apple. I think the last figures I'm seeing here bandied around maybe a third of that. So they've maybe burnt through some of their cash, but they've certainly always, or for a long time, have sat on some big.
Yeah, I may have thought 1.5 trillion might be the US deficit or something I was thinking of. So it could have been out by an order of magnitude.
Yeah,
but it's certainly a lot more than you and I have anyway.
And these are insane, amounts of money. And yeah, we'll be interesting to see what the reality is that sort of comes to play on these predictions on how much more efficient that AI can be operated. Look, if you can run it with 90% less compute and electricity and everything else, that completely changes the picture, right? That said, we've got OpenAI going into using ad revenue as their way to try and pay for all the people using their platforms. So it's interesting to sort of see them kind of fall back to an age-old mechanism to try and generate revenue without losing all their users by making it sort of pay to play.
Yeah, I suspect that there will be a magnificent kind of advertising opportunity for a brief period of time, and I only realised this in retrospect, but when Facebook and that kind of thing were blowing up, there was obviously just a huge opportunity for businesses to build on it, and it looked like that would continue forever. But basically what happened is, a third of the planet came on Facebook and businesses were kind of behind, and then you had, 1 billion people on Facebook with no advertisers. So the advertisers that came out early and started spending got this incredible return. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, everyone has to do this. So then you're competing against everything, the dollars per click and everything went to the moon. Now, OpenAI was the fastest adopted technology in history. I think they went to like 800 million users in like a month or something, you look it up. But no technology's ever been adopted faster. So they've got basically 1 billion users and no advertisers. So when they launch advertising, it'll be, quite quiet, and you've got a billion eyeballs out there. So I want to launch, as an advertiser and try and get some good bang for buck. And then I think it'll go downhill rapidly where, you pay $1 for a lead or something, and then all of a sudden it's $10 for a lead, and then it's like $100 for a lead, and then it's just the same as everything else.
Yeah.
But if there's any people that are keen to be first, that's kind of what I see, but could be wrong. But
Yeah.
it's what happened with social media anyway.
Yeah, I still remember buying advertising with Google, and they flipped one day from what was you were paying cost per, I think, 1,000 eyeballs, and then they moved to this particular date they moved to the option of paying per click, and you were able to initially buy a click, which would generally mean a visitor to your website for 1 cent. US, so that's going back quite a way. Over 20 years. But the way these things sort of evolve, based on demand.
Now it's like $10 for many services,
what you're able to do at different times in history can be very, very different in terms of the costs and the structures. And I remember we were building Social Network at the time, and we were able to attract 300,000 members on the smell of an oily rag, whereas if you wanted to attract 300,000 visitors to a website these days, it would cost you a small fortune, let alone to get those people convert to signing up. Interesting times. Grok has been a bit in the news over the last couple of weeks for not particularly nice reasons, and I guess this is X and Grok in relation to the AI image generation, being able to take photos uploaded of women, and I think maybe the reporting's changed a little bit, but initially it was also mentioning children, so maybe the issues have evolved a little bit, and really highlighting the app being able to use to, in an AI sense, sort of undress people, and putting them in somewhat revealing levels of dress, from full clothes down to bikinis and other variations. A little bit hard to fully understand, because of course it's not the sort of thing where you want to be going and delving in and testing these limits out. Certainly from my perspective, it's like, and I've been asked to do an interview or two on on this topic in the news, but it's just a challenge that we now have with all new technologies. Is there's kind of good sides to the technologies, and then there's bad sides. And with AI, I think there's a level to which whether it's an OpenAI, whether it's Grok, whether it's Gemini, they can try and put in place limits, but that's actually pretty hard for them to do and to get consistently right. And wherever there are limits, of course, people will find kind of ways to to mess with them and get around those things. And the other aspect is, if one tool sort of blocks it, there are going to be a whole range of other tools that either already exist or pop up, which was an interesting aspect of the reporting. Is there was this big focus on X and Grok, but when I researched this, it looks like, well, actually there's been a whole bunch of tools that can do this for quite a number
it's
of
essentially
years.
just an extension of the deepfake thing, right? And so when deepfaking started,
That's it.
With Grok, you can basically just say, okay, here's a photo publicly of Taylor Swift, and then you can copy Grok in Twitter, and you can name Grok and say, oh, I actually saw someone do this. There's a Taylor Swift posted, and then someone in the chat was like, Grok, can you put her in like a swastika bikini or something, and blah. And it's like, it's a Wild West. But before Grok could do that, you could do that with a high spec PC and a neural net. So there's people producing CP and all that kind of stuff on private machines. The technology of how to do it is well understood, so it's all going to be out there. I think that the difficulty is that if we allow governments to completely regulate what we see, then we don't have free speech, and free speech is important. So it's getting into the argument of how much should a government or some regulator be able to show you what you can and can't see, because if they have that power, they can use that for political purposes and all kinds of other things rather than just censoring, people fooling around and being, stupid. And as I say, people can produce deepfake stuff like, porn on private machines with, training data. I think the more important thing is that we're kind of entering the post-truth world, and that, obviously you can have unbelievably hyper-realistic images of what looks like someone. You can have real pictures that get on the internet that you can deny, and then you can have fake pictures be created. The general theme is that we're just living in a post-truth world. So, it's already happening where you're seeing, hyper-realistic, very believable pictures of politicians saying things they didn't say. There's been, propaganda from the Gaza war that I've seen on both sides, making things worse, making things better. It's just, it's very hard to see where it's all going to go. And it's pretty scary because you have your screen in your hand and you're looking at kind of news and you don't know whether it is news. So where is the world going to go, Pretty crazy.
It's pretty complicated, and working out how do we sort of maximise the sort of positives of these and minimise, the downsides. We've seen this kind of under 16 block for social media, which Australia have put in place. We've seen countries that are maybe blocking Grok because of what's happening here specifically. But if you take that sort of approach of say, well, we're going to block just Grok, but then not block the other tools, does that make a whole lot of sense? So, then you look at, well, should deep fakes in certain circumstances or, in all circumstances sort of be blocked? And each of these scenarios has kind of got some benefits, but usually some downsides as well. And it seems to me that often legislators are kind of just throwing something at a wall and trying it out to see what happens. Whether those plans actually ultimately end up being good for for everyone or not, that's not necessarily clear either.
Yeah, we probably a bunch of us saw the video of Will Smith eating spaghetti from a couple of years ago. And it's obviously this kind of messy, horrendous thing. And then, someone built a tool to detect, AI video and, just looking for artifacts and, edge clarity in some mathematical model. But I saw that, with the new VO3 model, they, someone produced video, ran it through the testing tool, which has been authoritative, and it completely said, no, this is 100% real because VO3 is now so good at generating video that's absolutely indistinguishable from reality, So a lot of people haven't yet seen that, but if you go searching for it, you can see stuff where you're like, I cannot tell this is real or not. Yeah, we're gonna it's just gonna be a mess. I don't know the answer to how to solve it, but it's definitely interesting times.
Yeah. Look, I think these things are quite challenging, and watching things like this, under 16 social media ban in Australia,
which I think is a mistake and horrendous. But
I think that the concept of wanting to protect youngsters, I'm there. We want to protect our youngsters, but it's how do you go about doing that in a kind of an arbitrary age limit?
I think it was a convenient excuse and a big lie for. We want everyone to have to enter their passport into the internet so that we can see exactly what everyone is saying. And if you look at things like Australia enacting, super, super rigorous, hate speech laws where now, if you speak out against essentially what they consider to be right-wing content, you can go to jail for 5 years. That's relatively new. If you can't speak out against the government because they throw you in jail and everyone has to auth in order to get on the internet, so you can't search anonymously. We're sort of heading to some pretty scary places. But I think the whole age 16 age verification was either a willful misdirection and making it sound nice. We want to protect children, and actually being, we can monitor everyone, or it was just an unfortunate side effect. But I don't think it's good.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly see how that plays out. I imagine, look, there'll be some positives that come out of it, but as you highlight, there's some real fishhooks.
Things like the fact that now when you go to the US, they search your phone, take your DNA, ask who all of your family is.
DNA? Where are they
Yeah, so
doing
the
that? I haven't had
new
that.
rules for visiting the US is you have to provide a DNA swab, you have to provide full palm prints, and you have to give 5 years of social media history, and you have to hand over your phone of us, and they plug it into like a CIA computer that will go through your entire phone. And a lot of people don't know this, but when you like delete a photo or you delete a message, it's not deleted, it's just marked as deleted. It still sits in your phone or iCloud or whatever. Yeah, I mean, every single thing you do on your phone is, fully available in signal intelligence, and that's just the way it is, So,
Yeah, some interesting things you tap in on there, and I think different people have the different view on just how far these things do and don't go. But yeah, I think there definitely are some things that we need to keep a little bit of a watch on. We want to encourage our governments to be heading in a positive direction. I think privacy of people's data and their communications is important, and at the moment in New Zealand they're looking at sort of expanding I think what the current sort of situation in terms of what the government kind of legally can enforce when it comes to communications and being able to access them. So that's one of those things that they're looking at expanding that out to all the international messaging platforms and so on. So no doubt some things go on behind the scenes that we don't know about, but I would certainly hope that our governments are largely committed to following the law.
there is a degree of, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you don't have to worry about anything. And so if you've just got holiday snaps and things on your phone and you're talking to your friends, it's fine. But I mean, there's been enough cases now where, phones have, if we go back to 2019, there was the backpacker Grace, who was murdered by the guy in New Zealand. And essentially, they had full access to both of their phones, even though the phones weren't present. All of the messages, they brought up in court, this guy searched YouTube for this particular thing, wiped it. They had everything, known to man, and it wasn't through the phone. It was accessed through the cloud and everything. That was back in 2019. So, there was the Grace Millane documentary, and if you read through the lines about the access to the data that they had it, everything, all his Google searches, everything on every computer, So yeah, it's there, and it's not exactly a secret, but not everyone knows it, but that's the case. But yeah, don't go murdering people, and you don't have to worry about it, So
well, yeah, we certainly wouldn't be recommending doing that. So keen to sort of delve in a little bit for a bit more of an update on what's happening in the Voyager world and your world. And yeah, you mentioned taking the reins as chief executive, but tell us what you expect that to look like and how you think that will evolve.
Yeah, so as I said, I started Voyager 15 years ago and ran it for 5 years and got it to about 30 staff. It's about 120 now. But I haven't been the CEO for a decade, which has gone by really quickly. And I lived in LA for 5 years of that, and I was traveling around the world. I did probably 100 countries of travel, and I took up photography as a hobby for a decade, and took 500,000 photos in 100 countries, and lived life. And I suppose you can't run your own stuff and have a lot of free time, so it's kind of one or the other. And for the last 10 years, I was like, well, I want free time. I don't want to be running my own stuff. Yeah, now that I'm older, I'm sort of more settled in New Zealand. I'm not traveling. Obviously, COVID happened. I just don't feel like traveling as much as when I was young. I wanted to go and see the world, and had my CEO get headhunted, which was, unexpected, but ended up being fine. I did have a moment where I was kind of nervous because, as I say, although I was CEO 10 years ago, I haven't run in like a 100-person organisation since the Orcon days, which was 20 years ago. So in my 20s, I was CEO of 100, and there's a big difference between being CEO of a 30-person company and being CEO of a 120-person company. It's a lot harder and just a different set of skills. So yeah, I mean, I was kind of nervous. I'm a well-known New Zealand tech entrepreneur, but you always get butterflies. And even though it was my own company, I kind of thought, well, I don't want to come back in and then make an embarrassment to myself or do terribly or not have the trust of the staff. So I was feeling a bit nervous. And also, you organise your life to take up the time that you have. So I felt that I didn't have a lot of free time. And so I was nervous, am I going to be even able to do this job? Have I got the energy? I had COVID a few times, and more than once, and ended up getting chronic fatigue some of those times. So I've struggled for the last few years sometimes with my energy if I get COVID again, because it's like a common cold, right? You can keep on catching it, and I seem to have caught it a few times. And then if I have a 2-month period where I'm exhausted, it's not fun, having to work 50 hours a week. So there was a bunch of things that I was nervous about. And I kind of worried, how am I going to feel? But after a month in the job, I was actually really surprised, because I found that actually working is really energizing. And one of the things I hadn't really counted on was that, when you might be the owner of a company, but when you're not the CEO, there's a certain amount of stress by, the fact that you're not in control, because, if things go badly, it's kind of out of your hands. You're trusting the CEO to do it, but there's this feeling of helplessness. It's like being in a pram that's rolling down the hill and not being able to do anything, or, you have those nightmares where you're being chased by a monster and you can't do anything. So there was kind of this feeling of helplessness that I hadn't actually appreciated, where I'm the owner, but I felt like I couldn't affect change, and there were things that I wasn't happy about how they were done. And when you're the owner of a company and you have a CEO, you can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. So to a certain extent, you have to step back and let someone run it the way that you want. So I've had multiple CEOs over the years, and they all have their own style. And for me to step in and say, hey, I own the company, I don't like the way that the milk's being ordered, or I think this is excessive, or whatever, it's just not, conducive. So you accept some compromises in terms of things that you just bite your tongue, but that's stressful as well. And so, I thought when I stepped back into the role, I'm older, I'm 20 years since I've done this much work, am I going to be able to cope? Do I want to be working this hard? Have I still got it? All of these things. But after a month, I suddenly thought, I feel really good that I can actually have things done the way I want them, and it actually feels less stressful. So, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that it's not actually hard work that causes stress. So, for example, if you asked Jeff Bezos when he was, forming Amazon and working 100 hours a week, was he stressed? Probably not. He was probably super enthusiastic and jazzed about what he's doing. So you can be working your ass off and not stressed, but you can also be sitting at home doing nothing and be stressed because you know that you're procrastinating. So you can be doing nothing and feel stressed out, and you can be working your ass off and feel stressed out. And so it's not actually the working hard that causes the stress. It's a feeling of incongruency, like I'm not doing what I was supposed to be doing, or, I'm helpless, as you say. So the surprising thing is I've gone from working basically nothing and having a bunch of middle-aged person hobbies and, hanging out at my lodge, Woodhouse Lodge in Warkworth, or playing the piano, or taking photos, or hanging out with friends, or going to festivals, or whatever it is that you do when you've got free time, but having an undercurrent of stress of I'm not running my own stuff. And what I found is that working 50 hours a week, I'm less stressed. Even though I have the business problems to deal with, I feel like I can actually make a difference, and it's quite exciting making a difference, and it's been quite fun, and all of a sudden I'm having all these ideas. So I was not prepared that if it would actually be very good for my mental health. So my advice to someone who listening out there is actually work's really important for mental health. Don't retire at 30 and end up doing nothing for a long time. I probably should have come back to work sooner, but I'm grateful that it's kind of worked out in a really positive way, and it's been more positive than I thought, which is great.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're out of time for this episode, but good to catch up, CB. Yeah, big thank you for listening in and joining us, and of course a big thank you to our show partners, 2 Degrees, Spark, Workday, 1NZ, and Gorilla Technology. We'll be back again, and we'll catch you on the next episode. All right, see ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.